I make my fence slightly adjustable. Some people glue them down. I've got actually 3 different positions it can go in. Once you know you're squared up, I'm pushing slightly that way and mostly that way. Sorry. Good job, Tony. And you get the idea.
Hey, will my meat slicer do the same thing?
Your meat slicer will, if it slices wood.
Very fine shavings.
Yeah, and you can set it, I normally run it finer like I was doing before, and then kind of bumped it up so we could actually see the shavings because we weren't getting enough physical media.
I've got two left.
You're getting dust.
I just brought stuff for people to see. We have no vise, so the odds of
Using them.
demoing a spoke shave are pretty slim.
Brent will just hold it between his knees.
When I have him advised, he uses my belly against an edge.
Like that. Let's see.
Did you make the handles for that? For your
No.
No.
So if you need to sharpen your saw,
Mm.
and you need a
I send it out.
nonsense.
To Glenn? To Glenn? Good point, Kerry.
So basically, I just slammed up a couple pieces of plywood, screwed them. Put these in to keep him guided. This drops into my vise.
Now, are those dominoes?
They happen to be dominoes.
They could be anything.
They could be dowels. They could be biscuits. They could be anything.
Hey,
Yeah, it just goes into the.
Brent, it's I like that.
What's that?
I'm changing my name to Brent Biscuit.
It could be dowels. They could be briskets.
Anyway, goes in the saw and clamps, or in the vise and clamps. You can file to your heart's content. So if you can't find one of those Cool-Eddy old antique metal ones or new ones, I think it really 2 hours. You know, make this thing.
But that looks way nicer than I think a lot of us would make a.
It didn't look that nice in 2 hours. I went back and cleaned it up. I'm sure. Let's see. Do I have other interesting stuff?
Oh yeah,
You guys have seen these?
but I've never
So
really understood
for
how they work.
Green and green fingers. Basically, you have a block, T-track. It's got a base, so I can clamp it to the bench. I clamp it so that this surface is even with the bench. Stick my nice big board in there, register against this lip. Run your router through, flip him around, take the mating piece, run the router through, and it automatically makes a mirror image. So they fit almost perfect every time. I've got a bag, I think it's an old camera bag or something, and I've got like 20 of these strips in there, so you just pick out the sizes you need.
And are those just made out of MDF?
These are just MDF, yeah, you can make them out of whatever. I guess I should mention the facing is some 1/4-inch hardboard. And I just pre-made a bunch of those, and you can get a few uses out of them, like you see.
Because they're sacrificial, and you're
They're
expecting
sacrificial.
to be able to.
Right. Your bearing is going to come back and hit this bearing surface, which means your cutter's going to dig in
And prevent tear out.
and prevent tear out. And so for not just for finger joints, but for irregular finger joints. That's the whole idea there. Wow, a big pile of stuff here. If you guys haven't made these for your casework,
I have.
make some.
Puppy deers.
Yeah. Super easy. I use them on almost everything. If you don't have flip stops on your table saw fence or your sled fence, cut yourself a couple little pieces of wood. Get yourself a locking nut. Here, pass those around for fun. And I generally use them in sets, so I've got a stop. Well, first they're both up. Cut yourself a true end, flip it over, cut to one size, flip the other one down, cut to your second size. Only if you find yourself in that quasi-production mode where you need a dozen of something,
You just clamp it to your fence.
just clamp it to the fence. Yeah.
Sandpaper on the edges for
For
friction.
grip. Yeah. And I have a little block at the table saw. It happens to be a 1, 2, 3 block. I set it, butt that up against it so I know that it's true and clamp it.
I have a piece of, it's probably about 5 inches by 2.5 inches by exactly 1 inch thick. The white plastic. What's the letters?
HDPE.
HDPE. That's sort of that I use as a setup block for a lot of stuff on my table saw.
And yet, the thing is,
Because it's having that exact inch.
I could make something like that, but I would not make it nearly so nice looking.
No, and there's another thing. When I make stuff like this, I tend to make like a half a dozen. Like if I'm making zero clearance inserts, like the backing plates for that thing, you only need 2. So of course I make a dozen, right? Because now they're sitting there. So then 3 months from now, when I go to use that thing, I'm much more likely to use it if I just pull it out, screw the things on, and use it. If I pull it out and go, oh, I got to make new backing boards.
It slows you
I'll
See,
down.
and
do
I would
something
make the
else.
dozen, and 3 months later I would make another dozen because I wouldn't be able to find the first 10.
Isn't that the best way to find a lost tool? Buy a replacement?
Yes.
This is the Veritas. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but back to saw filing. I changed the rake on the first inch or so of this one to about 17 degrees, which is a lot. And it makes it super easy to start. So I get that first inch or so, now I've got an actual groove and I'm in, and then you're just game on.
I wonder if I can get enough detail to see it. Probably not.
It's not so bad.
Probably got
Okay. Never got focused. Okay.
And the thing that made me start sharpening files was reading about everybody about how easy it is. and I've been beating the crap out of this thing for a couple of years. So I got a file and made the little clamping rig and said, you know what? I've had this saw for so long, and I just got the new Lee Nielsen saw. So now I'm, got the nerve to go at it. And very first shot, tried the thing. It was great. It's stupid easy to do. Sharpen your own saws. It's easy. Oops. Here's another example of make a dozen of them. There's a post on the forum of how I did this, but basically, I took a piece of plywood, I ripped 2 triangular pieces, glued them on the ends, then cut them all in strips, then cut them in half, stick a little sandpaper on them, and you got your own miter clamps.
Ah, there you go.
Cool.
Ingenious.
Glenn's bag of stuff here.
Prop comedy.
Bandsaw template guide.
There you go.
So this clamps to the table of the bandsaw. Bandsaw blade rides here. You set the height of this to clear your material. This is the template. This is a piece of particle board I had handy, just to show how it worked.
Right.
And it runs like that. So what is that actually doing for me? What that's actually doing for me is, instead of having, if I need to make 4 of these for a table, which I did, instead of having to cut all 4 of these out very carefully and get them as close as you can, then I go and I router template them. You take this guy and you can really just run them through, because you can't hit the blade.
Right.
So it's kind of a dummy proof. It's a dummy fixer. So you can knock them out within, a 1/16 of an inch or less. Now I go straight over to the router table and it becomes very quick to do.
So actually, this slides against here, this surface there.
Correct.
And you use that same template on the router table to clean it up,
Right. The template rides against this nose.
right?
I actually have a pointy nose for tighter radius. So the template is riding here. The blade is in this slot, so I can never run into the blade with my template. But as my material comes by, the blade cuts it. dovetail slots are in there for those.
And you fix it on the miter guide of your bandsaw?
I clamp it directly to it. This rear one on my larger saw, I clamp it to the fence and position it. On my smaller saw, I clamp it to the table.
Okay. That's cool.
And I think that's about it. Although I brought a shop-made stop block. Oh, I do. That's right. Found it easier to make stop blocks by just cutting a dado, milling a piece of stock to the size of my groove, and gluing it in. There's things that you see on the forum. People are going, "Oh, well, how do I do this?" or "I want to do that." It's like, well, go ahead.
Just do it.
Just do it. Yeah, exactly. Just go ahead and do your thing.
Think about it.
Let's see.
That's what I used to trick myself into going to bed at night. I start thinking about what's the best way to solve a problem.
So same idea. So let's say I made my rough cut with the bandsaw using the template. So I got a kind of rough size deal. You get the drift of what's going on here. These are those little auto grip Bessies, which were a godsend. You can see all the zillion holes here. I used to have regular Destaco clamps. Stop and adjust the height, this, that, and the other thing. With these, you set the tension that you know is required to keep the thing still, and then it doesn't matter how thick it is. You just set it up there and clamp it. The reason I have the little sticks is because sometimes things don't line up quite right, and I just put spacers behind them. Just kind of like that. And you want to have a little extra. This is actually kind of a bad example because you want to have extra lead in on your template, which kind of takes the place of your starter pin. So if I've got template out here and here's my bit, I'm already against the bearing before I hit the material. You don't want to kind of freestyle it into the bit.
All right. Zzz.
And this is literally just a piece of scrap ply, a piece of oak, some sandpaper. Just do it.
It's got a much better quality scrap ply than I do.
That's because I create so much scrap. Call Dad. Just talk to Dad.
Tell him I said hi.
The infamous auto adjust bandsaw jig. You guys have probably seen variations on this. So I want a dado to fit this. Just set in between the jaws. Tighten this guy down. So now I've got the exact width of my material. I actually fudged that. Hang on here. Get it all the way. May as well do a valid demo. So now that gap is the same size as my material, my undersized plywood, my, oops, I did one too many runs through the planer, whatever it is. So you've got your exact size. I just kind of, you can clamp it to it. I built the clamp in because I'm just kind of that way. So this clamps me up. So, sorry. This zero edge is the actual place where the cutter's going to go. The router has a template in it that rides this lip. So if your plate and your template are centered well, you don't have to worry about keeping the router in the right place. You can just do whatever you want. I generally run a 3/8 inch spiral, unless you want to cut smaller than a 3/8 dado, but be that as it may. Clamp this guy on, move him right up to your mark. Router goes in. Just
Back and forth.
have tons of fun until there's nothing left.
Not bad. It was useful.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Just do it.
I think we ran out.
What's in the basket of the bin underneath? Your
I
stuff?
think these are actually,
Those are the lovely party gifts. Oh no, wait.
these are the lovely parting gifts.
Oh, wow. Glad I asked.
It's a mallet my dad made me, which is too nice. So I've used it. It has a couple of dings on it, but mostly it just sits around and looks pretty.
Everybody needs a bunker.
And kabong.
Oh. You guys ever see the posts where I take little pieces of scrap and I'll glue a couple together? And you throw it over in the corner. Then you get some more pieces that are about the right size. Bring it back and you glue them on. You keep gluing it on until you get this big conglomeration of scrap all glued together. Then you square it up. You run it through the bandsaw or the meat slicer. And you get trivets.
Oh, nice.
Very nice.
Or if they're smaller, coasters. But I will literally glue this stuff up throughout the year. Every now and then when I get 2 or 3 pieces, I'll drag it over, glue some more on. And as it gets near Christmas, square it off, slice it up, throw a little mineral oil on it. Look, instant Christmas gifts.
I have to do this.
That's pretty cool.
Everybody can do this.
Yeah, anybody can do this.
Anybody can do this. Any scraps you got laying around.
Even me?
Yeah, we got
It's a
some.
cool idea. A very cool idea.
Yeah. Instead of having the scraps lying around, you know.
Yeah.
And it's because of silly projects like that I moved hundreds of pounds of scrap
Exactly
from
why.
California to New Mexico. And it costs probably who knows how many dollars per pound.
And I notice as my glue is getting near the end of its life, it's starting to get that kind of I'm turning into mayonnaise thing. I'll have a flurry of activity in this area. It's like, okay, glue it up. Just use this stuff up before it heads completely south. Let's see. The rest of these are actually just projects, so I don't know if there's
Awesome.
Tommy's gonna love this. All the shorts. I mean, we've got bins of shorts.
my strategic packing material. Again, a lot of this stuff I sent down because I didn't think I was going to be here, so I was kind of trying to be here in spirit.
Better packing material than I got to have towels hanging in my bathroom.
So these miters were glued using the amazing homemade miter clamps.
Nice.
And probably cut on that same
Not
shooting
on the
table.
table saw, no shooting board on this.
No shooting board?
Yeah, that was kind of part of the conversation earlier. Do you shoot all your miters? And the answer is Incra miter gauge, sack fence, table saw.
No need.
Yeah,
That's spirit side now.
yeah, bird's eye. This is like show and tell.
Keep showing and we'll tell.
And I brought this one because that's my dad when he was 17.
Oh my.
Cool.
And that's just yellow heart. So there's no colorants on any of these. They're all just the wood is the wood.
That's the best.
I find it safer for me to work that way when I start trying to get too experimental. Go south. I got a scroll saw.
Ah,
And Tony will love my carving. That's the best I can carve. Two little hearts. Actually, I cut them out on the
That's
scroll
not
saw and then I just carved a little groove. That's my whole extent of my carving career.
I like the hinge.
Oh, piano hinge.
Yeah.
They work good.
Yeah, what kind is in that one?
Piano hinge.
Those are Lee Valley specials.
He did more carving here too.
Yeah. You did some more carving in here.
Oh, yeah, that's
Well, the problem is
the
it
underside of the lid. This is kind of a thing that I do.
The only problem is it does need to be white.
Yeah. It lightens the lid. I like having a lot of material so I can get the funky profiles.
Mm-hmm.
But then the lid gets extremely heavy, so I thought, well, I'll just hollow that out. And then when I had it hollowed out, I thought, well, I may as well cut something into it. That one is cherry and walnut. This is pecan and maple. I think that's about it. Okay, and I asked Carol this question. Do urns creep people out?
no,
I've got a question about how you put this brass hinge in there. Did you use
only
a
if it
router?
talks me.
Because that's really nicely fitted.
Yeah. I happen to have a router bit that had the right radius.
Do they come with the rounded corners already?
They come around it.
How thick is the brass for that? Is it's 16th or an 8th?
14 gauge, maybe.
14 gauge.
It's pretty
Is
stout.
that the,
Yeah.
what, the piano hinge?
Yeah. It's their 90-degree stop hinge, so the hinge actually has the extra little hook on it, so it
They're about
stops.
30 seconds.
When you make such a box, how do you cut the lead out of the?
I make the top and bottom are floating panels,
Right.
so the sides all have the groove in it to accept that. You make the entire box solid,
Right.
then you go to the table saw, cut, flip it. I have some little jobbers I've made where there's an 1/8 inch. Sorry, I should preface this more. All my table saw blades are 1/8 inch. I did that on purpose because I use too many jigs. So it doesn't help if I've got a .125 and then a .140 and a .132. So I just have carbide processors make all my blades 1/8 inch. So I know exactly where they are. I never have to recalibrate anything. I can change blades anytime I want. Anyway, so the table saw cuts the groove that I'm after. The box is made. I make one cut through the box. Then I flip it up. I've got some pieces of wood that have a T shape to them. I stick that in the slot, stick a little piece of tape on it. The reason I do that will become clear as soon as you get to the last side, because if you don't have something in there, it's going to try to close. You either end up wearing part of the box as a face mask, or or at the best you screw up the box. So I just separate them that way. That way you've got the continuous grain. And I see what happened there. I hit snooze instead of stop. Let me fix that. So you get continuous grain and you get a fairly clean grain pattern. You do lose the 1/8 inch kerf. So on some of the, I don't have them here, which we probably have enough to look at, but you can see how the figure is going. You'll notice where the kerf is.
Yeah. Because some people, what they do is that they set their table so that it doesn't cut through the wood. It leaves a very thin.
I used to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had one where I cut it just a little bit too thin, and it collapsed on me while I was going through, and I thought, I don't want to do that again. There's certain experiences we all have where it's like, whatever I do, I'm never doing that again. And that was one of those ones where it was close enough to where it was like, I'm going to alter the way that I do this. So, and people have different ways of doing stuff. Whatever you're comfortable with is the way to do it. There's also a method on that
spending a week sanding the router burn out of this.
where you can cut alternating rabbets on the box before assembly, and then when you cut it in half, you end up with a
Okay.
slip-on lid. And in that method is where I used to use the almost cut through, and then you take like a razor saw or a Japanese saw and cut it the rest of the way.
I see the detail I really like on this is how this inner divider, that you didn't just do a dado, it's
Point.
45-degree angle point
yeah,
in the
that's
middle
neat.
there.
And oddly enough, that's actually easier.
Oh, really?
I forget where I saw that. I probably saw that on most of the stuff that you see me doing. I've seen it somewhere else. I just I'm always looking, always watching other people. Here we go. There's somebody in here. Don't freak out. It's my son. Anyway, the thing that makes this kind of trippy is the top construction. This is done with a router.
Freehand.
So quarter inch bit, a 3/8 bit, and you're just literally, here's my router plate.
Just going back and forth.
And you just try to do that enough. The piece was oversized, so I could kind of get into the groove of it. And then I got a look that I was pretty much happy with, and then I just did that a lot. And a couple areas that you screwed up, you generally end up with enough of a piece.
Yeah, look at this, very nicely done.
And on that one, the top actually is, I think it's maple.
Really?
So that one has colorant on it. It's trans tint cordovan, like a dark red,
Yeah.
and then some straight trans tint blue. And it looks all black and luxurious, but it's not actually really that.
No, that's
So
brown.
did you use a gouge or did you use a
Router.
rod?
Freehand. done.
Freehand handheld? The small
Yeah,
one?
Colt, little palm router.
Okay.
So the router's very small, so you got a little bit of control on it. I made a base for it that was big enough to where I could get this kind of action going on without feeling uncomfortable about it.
See, I'd probably program that into the CNC machine.
Exactly. Let him just do it.
He spend more
Just
time
take-
figuring out how to
Oh,
randomize
that
it.
would be hard.
Take a close-up snapshot of that surface and then just duplicate it right.
Duplicate it, feed it in.
Oh, how do you open this?
You don't.
You don't want to spill
Yeah.
granddad's
Yeah. I have.
ashes all over the
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have.
I thought it was just the box. Sorry, I
When you're making an urn that's going to somebody else, the bottom I make screw on, and then give them instructions on how to seal it. But if I'm making them for somebody and I'm doing the deed, I tend to just do it up, and it's like, here you go.
I've only made one urn, and that was on the lathe, and we still haven't transferred the ashes into that urn
Yeah.
because Keon hasn't worked up the will to do it. And plus, she wouldn't display it anyway.
Coasters,
Coasters?
same thing. So just basically made a loaf about that long, and then just set the bandsaw fence and just slice them like crazy. There's a guy named Mike Cullen. Did I get the name right? Have you guys watched this guy?
I remember seeing pictures of this box.
Yeah, so basically he has a method of making a bandsaw box. So this was a glued up block. I'm going to have trouble remembering exactly how you do it, but you tilt the bandsaw table and make these cuts and then reassemble it. So it's kind of a bandsaw box that's not like the traditional bandsaw box. The bottom is basically a plug that's cut from the part you cut out the middle, measure down so far, cut yourself a slice, drop it in, and it fits like a cork, a little bit of glue. This is not a rabbit, it's just another piece of this insert that gets glued on to a top. Anyway, there again, I mean, on Saturday you could make a half a dozen of these things.
Yeah.
It's one of those quirky things. I go, well, that's different. Let me try that. I think that's all I got.
No, it's not. It's not the script yet. You want to drag a stool over here?
You've got something
Perch
behind
on
you
it?
that's wrapped up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we'll do this. By the way, any of you guys want this for scrolling or anything? I just end up with a lot of it from doing resawing. Take it.
Well, since I drove down. Carrie wants it. Carrie can have it.
Piece or two. I figured you'd have this unwrapped already.
On my demo.
So I'm trying to understand if this was there a center to this?
Yeah.
And then the center was cut out.
Sakili. What can I tell you about it? The stair-stepped top and bottom are cut from a solid piece as opposed to glued up.
Oh, really?
Do that on the table saw with a fence doo-wopper I've got, which I didn't bring along. Her typical green and green heavy finger joints. Have any plugs? Coca-Cola pull. Shop-made pull.
You didn't just buy that at Rockler?
No. Actually, I might have got the blanket Rockler. I think it was a pen blank. I got like a box of 6 of them for $1 at the garage sale or something.
It's a little wide for a pin blank, for a typical pin
Is
blank.
it? Okay.
Usually they're 3/4 inch.
When I made my
So
first green and green dresser, I got hooked on making my own pulls. So I have shoe boxes of pulls that I collected over the years. Oh, there's a really cool one. I'll use that on something. They're out in the shed just like dying of old age because I got hooked on making your own pulls. It's too much fun. Let's see.
Well, if you got a bunch of old pulls, send them to me.
I can do that.
'Cause I'm always looking for old pulls that try to match.
I apparently don't know how to work this phone. Let's see.
Nine's red glass, which is nice.
So munions. So the glass sits in from the back. The glass is sitting in a small bead of silicone rubber as opposed to clips. Because those clips always tend to bug me.
I liked that Minions movie. That was cute.
The hinges are not really very high end. They just happen to be some that I had.
That penny, your signature?
Oh, the penny, yeah, the penny dates it. I do that for stuff that either my own stuff and stuff that I give to family. I tend to do that. Bridle joints on the door frame, I find that I like them best. They never seem to go out of square.
A lot of glue surface.
Yeah, a lot of glue surface. They just stay true. The latch is a washer here and a magnet inset above.
It's not a bullet.
Not a bullet. So when the door, because I didn't want it to click, so when the door gets close enough and the magnets align, it just holds him shut.
No, it looks like a bullet from here.
Yeah. And they're, the cabinet is sized for CD jewel boxes, because I'm a dinosaur and I still have CDs. And I made a nice media cabinet with 2 huge drawers in the bottom. And I filled them. And I still had CDs.
That needs
So
a
I
drawer.
made this.
That needs a drawer in the top.
A drawer? Oh, I should say, part of the reason this is constructed the way it is my original plan was to have this actually be a hidden drawer.
Oh,
I think the next one will have that.
You can also have a nice hidden one up on top, a little paper drawer.
you kids and your newfangled
Yeah,
CDs.
Oh,
Yeah, one little drawer.
yeah.
About this big, about this
The
thick.
hidden
half inch.
documents.
Yeah, which is really cool. You don't see it.
Let's see, the back is, I believe it's half lapped. Shiplap.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Shiplap.
And, oh yeah, that's right, I raised these.
Drawer space.
So I raised these to practice my plane work. Raised them by hand, basically you just draw a witness mark and pick your angle and go at it until you run out of lines. And they all interlock, they slide up into a small groove at the top and grooves on the side, and then they're tacked below. Nice way to hide your handgun. The finish is a 1-to-1-to-1 BLO mineral spirits and Cabot's gloss, I think, is used for the varnish. And it's just a wipe on, wipe off. So. And that's it. Unless there's something else I forgot covered up here
Well,
somewhere.
you did a fine job on show and tell. We'll talk a little bit about your philosophy of woodworking,
Okay.
how you approach a project, what goes through your brain while you're planning to make something.
This tends to fall face forward, so I'm going to set it on its back. If that's all right.
Well, I know that when you made your jeans drawer,
Yeah.
tell us about that.
So I have things that I make. Things that I've made before, I just make them again, right? Things that I haven't made before, you need to figure all that out. There's a whole design philosophy that goes into that, which is what Carol's talking about. I needed a tall boy dresser. I put my jeans in a drawer as opposed to hang them in the closet because I didn't have enough closet room. So I figured out if I folded jeans and stacked them side by side, how big a drawer did I need for that? That became the bottom drawer. I then did the graduating scale to get my height and depth, and basically the whole dresser was scaled around 2 pairs of jeans.
Wow.
That's what she's talking about.
But it's practical.
It's practical. The chest also has full extension metal slides let into the sides of the drawers, which doesn't really go with the style, but I wanted the ease of access. I notice this, I don't have the drawer in this thing, so it uses the shelf rather as a stop, so the door's going in a little too far. So I'm going to stand that back up. Anyway, again, so for my own use, I want the full extension drawer, I want the ease of use, so I tolerate the metal slides. If I had looked forward a little further, I could have done undermount full extensions. Could have also increased the cost of the project by $400.
So form does have its, or function does have its place.
Function has its place. A low boy that matches the tall dresser. It's a green and green. It just kind of screams green and green. It's got stuff poking out of it everywhere. which is why I have to dust all the green and green furniture. The wife will dust everything else, but I have to dust the green and green furniture. She's like, "Oh, you bring that in here? It's all on you, buddy."
It's sort of like that's all the turn pieces on the shelves.
There you go. So the low boy is a piece that I had made for other people. It's a 9-drawer chest, but it was for me, and I knew the dimensions I could use, and I could actually get it a little bit wider. So all of a sudden, I'm taking something that I've made before, and I'm going to do a variation on it. So again, there, form followed function. How much room does 2 stacks of T-shirts take up? That becomes the drawer width, and the rest of it gets built from there. Then you have things that you've never made before. Those involve longer conversations with the client, find out what they're after, and the things I consider, because I have a day job, oddly enough, the first thing that I take into consideration is, what is your timeline? Because if you come to me in November and you want a Christmas present for your husband,
What
I
year?
ask them,
What
what do you
What
think
year?
about Father's Day? But if you come to me in July and ask for something at Christmas, then we're good. So time's my first consideration. Let's see. And then there's, of course, things that you've never made before that are on your bucket list. I don't know if you guys have bucket list things, but chimney cupboards. I don't know why. I am fascinated by chimney cupboards. I have nowhere to put one, so I have never made one, and no one's ever asked me to make one. But if they did, I'd give them a discount because I want to make a chimney cupboard. Sofa table. I have no room for a sofa table, but I really want to make a sofa table. And there's probably another half a dozen things. They're just random items that you've either seen somewhere or you've seen someone else make, and you just want to make them. So hopefully I will.
Philosophy on tools.
Tools. I subscribe to the Sam Maloof philosophy, which is pretty much whatever will get the job done. I don't get hung up on traditional versus power. I'm not worried whether it's hybrid work or hand work or whatever. I think Sam Maloof used to use a drywall grater to shape table legs or something. There's some story to that extent out there somewhere. I don't have a drywall grater, but I've got a Grobert rasp, which I think was like $18. I use that thing all the time. I've got another rasp. It was about $80. I use it about as much. It doesn't really matter. There's a paradox where if your tools are bad enough, they will be difficult enough to work with to where you will not be interested in working with them, and it will have kind of a negative influence on whether you're going to do something or not. So you want nice enough tools to where they function appropriately. They do the job they're supposed to do. If they're any nicer than that, great. But, you know, an old Stanley plane.
Fully subscribe that.
Yeah. Here's a Miller's Falls number 4. They don't call them number 4s because they size them by inches. So this is a number 9. But I bought this in this condition for $30. Great plane. I don't know what a Lee Nielsen number 4 costs, but it's probably $180, $200. And I'm sure it cuts a lot better. Or maybe not. But it's probably a lot more fun to use. Let's see. Cutters. Buy quality cutters. Don't buy cheap router bits. Don't buy cheap saw blades. Don't buy cheap sandpaper.
And cheap doesn't necessarily mean cost.
Correct. You will burn through twice as much money's worth of cheap sandpaper doing the job that a quality abrasive will do. You'll get a much better result from a quality abrasive because the wear factor isn't so fast. It gives a consistent cut over a longer period of time.
And if you want a good paper, Norton
Norton.
is the best.
Norton papers. There you go.
But well, for example, bandsaw blades. A lot of us use Ellis blades, and have had good success with the Ellis blades.
Right.
They cost $8 or $9 a pop instead
And
of
they
$20
work
a
fine,
pop.
and they've got a good long life.
Yeah, and it's an expendable, shop accessory. It's not a permanent tool that you
Yeah,
buy.
and that's a good point because a lot of people don't get it through their head that some of the stuff we use is a wear part. They're like brakes on a car.
So are you going to buy a lesser quality blade than a high blade just because it wears out?
No, my point there is there are good quality blades available. They're just not the high price name brands that everybody
Right.
buys from Woodcraft.
Oh, and what is it?
Ellis
Ellis.
is the one that Todd got us all started using, or a lot of us. I don't. Have you used them, Glenn?
I've run some Ellis. I tend to favor Timberwolves, but now I also like wood slicers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but again, these are
the wood slicer
$30 blades as opposed to $100 blades.
The wood slicer does stuff that none of the Ellis blades have done, but
Wears
the
out quick.
Ellis blades I've used for greenwood tended to work as good as anything that I was using that was 3 times the price.
There you go.
Lasts as long and cut as good. And cutting greenwood, you're not shooting for accuracy. You just want something that holds up and can
And
sand
to
it and
Dave's
twist
point, the Norton paper, I mean, you can buy Mirka, right? You can buy Micromesh, or whatever the stuff is called.
It just doesn't last.
Yeah.
And Norton is no
If
grain
Norton's
fill.
doing fine, then
no
why not
no
just-
fill, and you just take it out.
Yeah, smack it on. It's funny that he says that because that's exactly what I do. Is I smack it on my fan leg.
That's what I got into buying the 50 packs.
Yep.
Yeah, 100 bucks.
Yeah,
You can get through it.
commercial, and you're using a lot.
How do you round the edges of the? How do you round those edges by hand, or you use a router?
On this box, I did it by hand. Carol and Larry were at my house watching me do it by hand, and they said, "There's got to be a better way to do that." And we took 10 whole minutes and glued a couple of pieces of plywood together, and I happened to have a micro router bit, so that these fingers are very large, not necessarily a problem. On the box I was working on, they're about the size of my fingers, so the bearing on a lot of bits won't fit in that. Amana makes a miniature set. I happen to have that bit, so I used it to power round them and then did the rest by hand. So the final work is done by hand. These are all done by hand. The ones on the machine and then to hand end up looking about the same. I find I can get the end grain look that I'm after. I have never found a way to do that with power, so I almost always end up doing some hand work. I cut the paper in strips, use my thumb like a platen, and literally pull it across,
Yeah, this is
and
what
I
do
follow
also
it.
in carving.
Yeah, I follow the grain. I just seem to get a better, I don't know if it's a better look or not, but it's the look that I'm after, which is what's important to me. It's like, that's what I want it to look like. Okay, what does it take to make that happen? Did I wander off?
No, you did fine. You guys got questions?
How much time a week do you spend in the shop working on your projects?
Much as possible. That conversation comes up now and then about people that spend time in the shop because it's like their decompress zone. You're in IT, you can probably relate. I've spent 30 odd years dreaming in hex. I go into the shop, I purposely don't use metric because I want to use fractions. It must use another part of your gray matter or something, but I go in there and I just start thinking in 30 seconds and 16ths, and I'm just in the zone. I would say if I have an active project running, it's typical for me to spend at least 2 to 2.5 hours a night in the shop. So I work an early shift, so I'm off at 3, so that's not as...
I can relate to that. I do
And
exactly the same.
for me, the lathe was much the same. Yeah. At the time, I was technical writing, so it's all right brain stuff.
Yeah.
Or all left brain stuff, excuse me.
Yep.
I'd go into the shop, throw a chunk of firewood on the lathe with no guidelines, no plans,
Just
no
go at it.
measurements, and just start taking wood away. And that was my, work
Your
the other side of
release.
the brain for a while.
Yeah, it's like your meditation zone. Yeah, I've read other people post in some of the forums, and whenever somebody posts this, I can totally relate to it. I don't even have a project going on, but I'll still walk out in the shop, and I'll just kind of wander around out there, and, or just lean against the bench and stare at my wood pile. And I don't know, it's just it's relaxing for me. So let me veer back towards the original question. It's okay to be really passionate about your woodworking, but if you have things that you're doing for someone else, you need to employ a healthy work ethic. People already know if somebody comes to me for a dresser, the soonest they're going to get that thing, if I'm not doing anything else, is about 6 months. That's a long time for somebody to wait for something, but I have a day job. So if they're already going to wait 6 months, I want to make sure they're not going to wait 9, so I tend to stay at it. So I try to hold myself accountable. Besides, it's fun.
How do you figure up costs, materials for a job,
Let's see.
and in labor, I guess, to
I've-
price it out?
This is probably terrible to say, but I've found that if you price other people doing similar work and use their prices and approximately hit their target, you're fine.
Good.
I've never really done the add up the board feet and double it thing. It may turn out to be that. Certainly you don't want to, well, I shouldn't say it that way because sometimes you do. There are things like a chimney cupboard that I would be willing to make at a loss just because I want to make one. But yeah, if I'm doing something for somebody else, obviously you want to be paid for your time. You want to make a little bit of money off of it. For me, it's a hobby, an enthusiastic hobbyist is how I consider myself. So I'm not trying to make top dollar, but you want to make a little bit of money off of it because it helps you then replace cutters or get blades sharpened or buy more wood.
I was going to ask about wood, so
I've got a boatload of walnut because I come from the school of if it's worth making, it's worth making out of walnut. Most of the stuff in my house that I've made is either walnut or cherry, so I kind of started down that vein. Walnut became a little tough to get a couple of years ago. One of the stories I heard was that China was buying it by the container full, sight unseen, and you couldn't get your hands on it. So I kind of fell into this pattern of when I walk into my friendly lumber yard, which is literally 2 miles that way. If I see walnut that looks worthy, I just get it. I have a lot of sapella, Sipo, hard and soft maple I use for secondary woods. Figured woods, we've all been in the lumber yard and it's, oh, I gotta have that thing. So I have an area in my shop where I have vertical wood storage, horizontal wood storage, a little bit of a diversion there. Vertical wood storage is for anything that's heavy. That usually means tall stuff, but not always. Some woods are just heavy, and I don't want to wrestle with them on the horizontal bins, so they all end up vertical. Horizontals for shorter, lighter stuff, and I've got an area where I just keep all of my kind of interesting things. Bird's eye maple, figured pecan, curly walnut, just odd stuff. And I've spilled out of that and had to build a second rack the same size. I spilled out of that and now have some at my mother-in-law's house. So I've kind of reached the point where I'm self-regulating, even though I see some, oh man, I guess I got nowhere to put that. So I've reached the point where my shop is also this way. If something's coming in, I have to stop and decide what's leaving, because that's the only way this thing is getting in there.
Yeah.
I've reached maximum density.
One of the problems I'm facing with trying to set my shop up now is I don't have wall space now to put my wood rack. And I have one of those 4-prong
Yeah.
Woodcraft metal wood
And
wood
no wall
racks,
to put
and
it on.
it'll hold tons of wood, and I have maybe a quarter of a ton of wood. Yeah, I don't have a full rack full, but I have some pieces of lumber that I'm not going to just throw away. I don't have a piece of wall big enough to put it on, so I don't know how I'm going to store what lumber I have, and I'm not actively out buying
Lengthwise or height-wise or what?
wall-wise, square footage-wise. I just don't have a blank space of wall as wide as a 6-foot board.
Because you do client work, and this question comes up on the forum a lot. So how do you determine the price that you're going to charge a customer?
Yeah, we were just talking about that. And my answer on that was basically, I found that if you look what other people are doing for similar quality work and price yourself similarly, you're fine. Or you're going to make money. And
Do you ever actually track how much time you spend on a client's piece, just so you have an idea? Ooh, I really missed that one.
I did track myself on a hutch piece that I make, but I found it depressing. So I comfort myself with the fact that every time I make that thing, I can do it a little bit faster.
Yeah, that's all.
There's a curve there. It's always the new piece. And there was a period of probably a couple of years where it seemed like everything I was doing it for the first time. Everything I was doing is like, oh, wait, I need to get one of those to do that. I didn't even have the tools or the facilities to do it. After a couple of 3 years, then that leveled out and things started going, oh, that again. Or, oh, I need to do this sort of a thing. I don't know if that's an answer.
Well, I've tried 3 times to track you know, the amount of hours I put on my carvings, and I started, well, I mean, get right down, 2 hours today, but all of a sudden I just get fed up of it and just continue working because, I mean, it deconcentrates me.
Right,
And
right, and there again,
concentration.
the luxury of being an enthusiastic hobbyist instead of
Yeah.
a professional is that I have a certain level of something that I'm trying to achieve, or I have a certain end point that I'm trying to get to, and if that takes me 30% longer than it really ought to, I'm okay with that because I want the end result. I'm after something that looks like this, and I'm going to spend as long as it takes and put the amount of effort in that's required to make it look like this.
As a project manager, we always did our estimate the best we could based on the information that we had, and then we take the answer, or what we came up with, and multiply it by pi. So it's going to
There
take
you
you
go.
3.14 times
I like
longer
that.
than you thought.
So material cost, how long I think it'll take me times pi.
Right.
Well, my tool panel, I calculated that it took me something like about 300 hours, you know. And then some people say, how much would you charge for that? And I said, well, just imagine, it took me 300 hours. And obviously, I'm not charged, you know, $10 an hour. So.
Well, and I think the less functional something becomes and the more artistic something becomes, I think
The
it
more
becomes
difficult
harder
it
to
is.
price and harder to
Yeah.
quantify.
Yeah, it's
Because
exponential.
it is.
It's way difficult. When I was doing it for a living, I had worked up over a period of time how long it would take to mill a piece. And since I drew all my plans in SketchUp, I knew exactly how many pieces I needed to mill to put the project together. And so I just wrote a spreadsheet that covered it. I'd enter in the number of pieces and it would calculate it out. And I was surprised by how accurate it was in terms of time,
Interesting.
and blown away by how much money I had to charge. Because it says, you know, well, you know, I'll give you $150 for that. Can't buy the wood, you know.
Right.
And
Yeah, we're all victims of the Walmart IKEA world.
Yeah.
and it's, you know, it's the tough thing. It's the toughest thing to reconcile in your own brain. That you cannot attach value to that.
Yeah.
You can't say what I would pay for that. No,
Yeah,
what
I can
would your
almost guarantee you,
customer
unless
pay?
you've been doing it for a period of years, you are undervaluing yourself
Absolutely.
at every turn.
I think that we are good workers, you know, but we are very bad salespeople. Most of us.
Yep.
I think so.
How many
Yeah,
pieces do you think you make a year?
At large pieces, I can only make 2 or 3 a year, and that's literally a time restriction for me, which is why my client base are people who are after a certain thing and they want that thing and they're willing to wait for that thing because it's just going to take that long to
And
do it.
it sounds like your clients have an understanding and appreciation for what goes into making.
That's part of the conversation, and to the project management point of view, proper setting of expectation. Cannot emphasize that enough. If you're doing one-off stuff for people or you're doing custom things for people, and it's going to take you an extended period of time, estimate that as correctly as you possibly can and try and hit that target.
What we do, and we're doing stuff and making things for people. What gets me is I can go through and tell Tony and those guys, okay, what they're going to use, what they're going to use, how they're going to go about doing it. Pretty much have an hour, you know, figure it out. It's going to take 3 days to make this piece. But then I think, what are you guys doing? Well, we're putting it together to make sure everything fits, and we got to take it apart, and then we have to finish it. We have to put it back together, make sure everything fits because of the swelling and things like that, and finishing before they glue it up. And then they're taking it all apart, they're doing all these little adjustments, but you know, before they glue it up, it drives me nuts. Because there goes all these extra hours that I'm like, you know, I wasn't even thinking about.
See, I don't know. I don't think Dave has to worry about how long it takes to do stuff because I'm convinced from seeing his work that he has magic elves. I've seen the before and after pictures, and it's just there's
Yeah.
no way that's possible.
I have magic elves.
Yeah.
You must have magic elves. I can't believe some of that stuff. I see.
He
It's
also
amazing.
has a talent that has become known. You know, he has very few peers in this country
Yeah.
that is able to do what he does. That's one way to lock in your clientele.
Well,
Not anybody else, not just any. Look, take Sam Ballou for example. You know, Sam had a certain style of furniture, and as long as he stayed with that, when he died, he was out like 17 years in rockers that he couldn't build because he didn't live long enough. Well, these guys took over and did that. But his reputation was just that's what he built, just like we were in and out the other night having hamburger. I said, this is a perfect example of a business that does one thing and does it really well. And Sam did that. He had a particular style that he stayed with, and it was extremely.
The market furniture making that I look at in this country, the furniture I've seen, they stick with, particularly do stuff. I mean, it's, man, the guy
Yeah,
was a
I'm
master.
still making it.
Still
And
making,
Mhm.
Yeah.
still making.
And they cut a lot of corners on the new stuff, particularly in the finishes. And I see a lot of their stuff come through where the finishes just blow up as soon as a drop of water hits it. The finish is gone.
Well, if you take the behind-the-scenes tour at the Getty Museum, you get to see the undersides and the backsides. And
I get to see it in the shop.
quality of,
Yeah.
the quality of wood that they used basically was found stuff. They didn't worry about anything except the surface that was seen.
Yeah. Well, that's always an eye opener
Really
when you see
mind
something.
blowing, because here you are, a piece that virtually they determined is priceless, and we put a dollar amount on it. And you take out a drawer and turn it over and go, why?
Ah,
Yeah, there's staples and it's an old
Oh,
orange crate
all chewed
label.
up or something.
Yeah, and you
Just
guys, in your woodworking, you guys talking about a couple hours here and there. For me, that's my artwork. Where I might get 3 pieces done a year. It takes,
Yeah, the low boy I was talking about, there's a center divider in the low boy that is a piece of plywood from an old reclaimed stereo cabinet that somebody gave me. Now, I don't do that when I'm selling the piece to someone else, but for my own, I just need a piece of structural material and
Yeah.
got it work.
More on the personal side, this is a personal question. I mean, spending 2 or 2.5 hours every day doing your work, I mean, how do you balance that with your family life?
Well, fortunately, all my kids are grown.
No, especially your wife.
Um,
Does she complain anytime?
She's enjoying the 2.5 hours.
she
Fortunately,
enjoys,
my wife doesn't like me very much, so
she's enjoying the peace and quiet. It seems to work for me. I don't have problems with that.
You know,
You know.
she called him a while ago, so it must be okay.
She called me because I forgot to call her and tell her I made it alive. So
She cares, right?
she's just finding out if it's time to call the insurance company and cash in. Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
It's new policy.
Well, it's interesting because I'm seeing a fair amount of parallels in what you're talking about as far as doing business as an enthusiastic hobbyist. I'm seeing a lot of parallels that I've become aware of in the music business.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
you and I both did the music
How many
business.
hours a day do you spend practicing?
Yeah, some weeks none, some
Right.
weeks
Tons.
tons, and it kind of depends on how driven I am.
Yep.
But just the business practices you were talking about, taking on work that you're not interested in doing versus taking work you're interested in doing. We all have real jobs, so if somebody offers us a gig that's sort of going to be more work than it's worth, it's like, tell you what, why don't you call
Somebody else.
Chris Raven? He'll play anywhere. And actually, yeah, there's a guy in town. He's a musical whore, and he'll play anything, anywhere,
Anytime.
and he'll undercut any band in town. And so we throw him all the dog gigs, and we have the luxury of picking the pieces. The shows that we want to do. You're talking about tools. Now I may be different than some people, but there's a certain level of this is just plenty good to get me through what I need. So I'll play a $400 Mexican-made Fender instead of a $2,000 American-made Fender, and I get the exact same notes, and it sounds
does the
to the
job.
audience they can't tell the difference.
Yep.
I might have a rack of 5 guitars that's worth less than what some guy at another gig has on his shoulder.
Yeah, and how many guitars, you were mentioning how many you take to a gig, you know what the songs are, the song list that you have to do, and you know what's required to do that, and that's the tools that you take.
Right.
And when I'm space restricted, like anybody with a home shop is space restricted. So when I'm doing a project, I'm going through all of the SketchUp and planning and percolating and philosophizing about it. While all that's going on, I'm generally clearing out the shop and getting it oriented for what I'm about to do. Because I know I'm going to bring in a bunch of lumber, because I'm anal about selecting my figure and stuff. And I go through and chalk mark stuff up, and there's just lumber all over the shop. Get all of that done, break out my parts, and then I get it all back out of there. When it's time to mill, I set up to mill. I know what tools I need to do that. So I need this, 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 and this. Everything else gets kind of pushed out of the way, and I don't care what condition it's in or that there's stuff stacked on it, because I don't need it right now. And I do that thing. So a lot like, there's some gig you're going to do, you just need 2 guitars. Some
Yeah.
you need 5. Some you need this particular guitar and it's out getting fixed or something. You know, well, that's good.
Do you have a portable mill?
What's that?
Do you have a portable mill?
I don't have a portable mill.
I
I
learned
don't.
when I was doing it for a living, and I'm a slow learner, so I did this twice. I made 2 pieces that I really did not want to build. And I was perfectly miserable doing it. I was not happy with the end results. The customer was, I wasn't.
Sounds like my day
And
job.
said, you know, you don't get any hours back. There's no really such thing as saving time. You don't get to use time that you didn't use today. You don't get to use it on Tuesday. It's a finite thing. You do it now or don't mess with it. And so I took business that I wanted to take. I took clients I wanted to take. I told an attorney, I don't work for attorneys. She said, that's discriminatory. I said, whatever, sue me.
Oops,
I
one
don't work
person
for
to say that
attorneys.
to.
She said, why not? I said, because you don't pay your bills. So I'm straight up front with them. You have to fight like crazy to get an attorney to pay their bill. When you're a single person business, you can't afford that nonsense. You got to get paid. So, you know, I know a lot of people in the business. We wind up doing a lot of things besides actually woodworking because there's not enough clients out there that'll pay the going care. But they get around to this point where they're only going to take the jobs they want to take. They're only going to build a piece they want to build. Like, you know, you have a bucket list piece in terms of a chimney cabinet. Do you have another one?
Yeah, sofa table.
A sofa table. So he's got 2 bucket list pieces.
A floating top sofa table with sculpted legs.
There you go.
Just so we
You
know.
And I think we could go around the room and say, if you had time to spend woodworking, what's your bucket piece? What would you want to build? I have a whole set of pieces. I spent spare time at seminary trying to get some balance in my life and stop studying theology and design furniture. So I've got a notebook full of a whole house full of furniture. You know, may never live long enough to build it, but maybe I'll get a few pieces.
Mhm.
And what it'll do is they'll warm my heart. And that's the kind of an important thing, and not just with woodworking, but anything that you do. You have to bring the same philosophy.
Do you ask your clients to make it like a down payment, 50% of?
Half down, non-refundable.
Okay? Not with him.
We have already had that conversation before you give me your money.
Mhm.
Now, if I don't deliver, yes, I'm going to refund their money.
But basically, you spend that money on materials
Right,
as
exactly.
soon as they give you the check. You're at the lumberyard
Right.
spending it. It's not going to.
Yeah, when you're slinging stuff around at $8-10 a board foot, and you start breaking down parts, you've spent the money.
Yeah, you can't take the wood back.
Just
can't saw it up and make
what
coasters
kind
out
of table is a sofa table?
Sofa table or a hallway table is a narrow, long. I'm almost afraid to let go of that. A narrow, long
Long
table. Generally, it'll be in an entry hall where you come in. That's where you drop your keys,
Okay.
or it might be for a
And it could be
vase.
the length of the sofa.
Fundamentally, a decorative, sort of functional piece.
It could be very narrow. It could be like this. But typically, it's as long as a sofa. It's parked behind the sofa.
If you have a
Or
sofa
down the
that's not
hallway.
against a wall, sometimes people have the table behind it. I think that's where the sofa
Yeah,
table.
put books underneath.
Give
that.
it place
So
to park the
usually
light.
it's at the entrance of your house.
I guess if it's at the entrance, they call it a hallway table, and if it's behind the sofa, you call it a sofa table.
For example, Tony,
Yeah.
if this sofa was here in the middle of the room, that
would
table would be
be-
behind it, and it would have a lamp on each end, or
Okay.
a
Yeah,
plant,
I'm
or-
thinking 10 to 12 inches deep,
But the-
30 to 35 inches wide, 32 inches.
The
to
older and
34
more
inches.
dents and stuff in it, and character it has, better looks.
They're fun, small, decorative items that you can play with. If you've ever wanted to do big sweeping arc stretchers and stuff, that's a great place to do it. If you've ever wanted to do the floating top or long overhang sides, that's a place to do it.
A good place to get ideas for a table like that is Chinese long benches.
Yeah.
We got a few of them that are pretty
A
cool.
lot of people do them with slab. They do natural edge. You'll see a lot of natural edge stuff.
Well, since it was our intention to video as much of this as we could and upload it to the forum under the general heading of what would Glenn do, I think Glenn has a question of what would the viewers do.
Oh, do I?
Where's
Okay.
your sign?
What's that?
Where's your sign?
Oh.
Oh.